Okay, so we're going to pick up where the last video left off here and go to the next portion of our PowerPoint when it loads. My computer's running a little slow today, so hopefully you'll be patient with me in that regard. Okay. So the first thing we're talking about is going to be the vagina. And again, this is going to be a tubular organ that's located between the rectum, urethra, and bladder. And the idea here is that it's a collapsible tube of great distension. It's basically it's an anterior wall shorter than the posterior wall, and it's got this thing called a hymen. This is a mucous membrane that forms a border around the vagina. Basically the vagina's got a couple of functions. The biggest thing that it does is it lubricates and stimulates the penis during sexual intercourse, which allows for the semen to come in and the sperm to get to your egg for conception. In addition, it's also the lower portion of the birth canal, and it transports blood and tissue during menstruation. So basically, it kind of functions as just like a little like canal that allows for you either to have a baby out of or to have your period. Okay, the next one is going to be your uvula, and this is going to be it's basically an area again on the outside of the or on the outer area of your female reproductive system, and basically it's got a lot of different things. It's got your clitoris in there, urinary mendes, vaginal ordocytes, pretty much everything else other than your cervix that is included within your perineum. That's not included in the anal triangle. Okay, so basically your pubic hair and your labia will protect the clitoris and vestibule, and this is going to have the sensory receptors that send information to the brain for sexual response. The vaginal ordocyte is going to be the boundary between the internal and external genitals. Okay, so again, your clitoris is right over here, and this stimulates whether or not you're going to have a sexual response. Okay, so when we're going to be talking about the female reproductive cycle, okay, so there's a couple different things that go into for you to have essentially a menstruation or a period. So the first thing we're going to kind of talk about is going to be the ovarian cycle. So your ovaries are going to go through oogenesis once a month, essentially. They're going to take your eggs that aren't ready yet and make them into ovum or the female gametes. So when you're at the time of your birth, you're actually going to have the number of oocytes in your primary follicles. That means that basically your meiosis process, the mitotic process, is going to be suspended. So that's why a lot of women, whatever gametes they have are what they have for life. Okay. So at the beginning of menstruation, you're going to have several oocytes that resume meiosis. Meiosis stops just before the cell is released into ovulation. After ovulation, any ruptured cells form the corpus luteum, and the idea here is that they're no longer good. They're no longer good gametes anymore because they have not gone through the ruptured cells here have not gone through have not become a female or a fetus. Okay. So when we look at the menstrual cycle, it's divided into 4 phases. You're going to have the menses, the post-menstrual cycle, or the pre-ovulation phase, pre-ovulatory phase. That's going to be then you're going to have ovulation, and then the pre-menstruation or luteal phase. Okay. So within there, the menses that's going to be the first phase, and that's just your period cycle. So that's going to be when you have your period. And it usually occurs between 1 to 5 days. I have heard of people lasting longer, but for the most part, it's for 1 to 5 days. Then there's going to be a phase, essentially, it's kind of like these happen within a week of each other. So we kind of think of it as mostly like this is your first week of your menstrual cycle, we'll say. So this would be your second weekish. And the idea here is that it's preparing, like basically changing up what hormones you're secreting to indicate that you need to undergo ovulation. And that indicates that the oogenesis needs to occur so ovulation can occur. Pretty much that's all that's kind of going on here. But you're going to have much higher estrogen levels. You're going to have much more of a follicle phase, is what they call it. And they may also call this the proliferative phase, which is where it's just kind of telling you that you're making your female gametes. The next one is ovulation, and that's the release of your ovum into the pelvic cavity that can happen. And the idea here is that during ovulation, this is when obviously would be the most good time for you to get pregnant. But the idea here is that if you happen to have unprotected intercourse during ovulation, the idea is that the sperm would be able to find the egg. Okay, and then the premenstrual cycle. This is where it detects whether or not you have a situation where you've created a fetus and it's going to embed into your uterine wall, or you don't have a fetus made and instead your uterine wall is going to shed and you're going to get your period. And that's all going to be based off of your a lot of times they consider this the luteinizing hormone and all those types of things, allowing for you to be able to understand and know that you need to secrete that menstrual lining. Now, the myometrial cycle, so this kind of occurs infrequently, increasing frequency during the 2 weeks preceding, so in this area, preceding ovulation. And the idea here is that you're going to get some contractions. So this is where your cramps come from, essentially, okay? And then therefore that means that you're not going to have, the idea behind this is that you're not going to have a situation where you have a fetus that's not properly embedded into the uterine wall. This kind of decreases the expulsion that would happen, okay? And the gonotropic cycle, again, the idea here is that this is just going to kind of be more of the idea of your hormones. You want whether or not you want to basically help regulate what's going to happen within your menstrual cycle. Okay, so the gonotropic cycle kind of is the control of that menstrual cycle. Again, control of reproductive cycles. So cyclic changes in the ovaries result from any type of gonotropins that are secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. And if your estrogen increases, hits the peaks, you can obviously cause ovulation. Okay, so we've got the anterior pituitary gland, and again, remember these two hormones that we're talking about within these are going to be your follicle stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormone. So your follicle stimulating hormone, it kind of helps. It's almost like your initiation to start really going through the idea of either having a menstrual cycle or going through female reproduction. And that's just basically the idea is you want to stimulate the hormones and create more luteinizing hormone receptors on your cells within your follicles or within your gonads, okay? The luteinizing hormone is what causes for things to happen. So it stimulates follicle growth and the oocytes to growth to become ovum. Then it also stimulates ovulation, and it also stimulates luteinization. And the idea here is that that's going to allow for progesterone and estrogen to be secreted from your follicles. Okay? So again, luteinizing hormone, what they do, they want to complete the growth of pre-ovulatory follicles. So pre-ovulatory, your oocytes and things along those lines. It sets in motion the breakdown of connective tissue of the ovarian cortex, and it promotes essentially a temporary endocrine gland that releases your estrogen and your progesterone. Okay, so blood surge, this is what we call, if you have any type of situation where you get more progesterone released, it's going to be called an LH surge. Okay, so if you have, for instance, whenever we're talking about this gonotropin secretions here, again, these are all going to be based off of hormones again. So if you have any type of estrogen Estrogen usually indicates that you're going to eventually see the ovulation that's going to occur. So the idea of what's going to happen in the uterus is that you're going to have proliferation of endometrial cells. You're going to be essentially preparing the wall of your uterus to embed the future fetus. So that's kind of the idea here. So you're going to get growth of endometrial glands, and you're going to get more spiral arteries to the endometrium. And you're also going to increase your water content because that's going to be very important. A lot. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I was yelled at for not drinking enough water while I was pregnant. So again, and myometrial contractions. If you're having, so that's going to be in the postmenstrual phase. If you're going to have progesterone levels, this is going to indicate that you might either need to prepare for endometrium for implantation, or you might need to increase the water contact of the endometrium and decrease the myometrial contractions. In addition, this could also indicate that you might need to secrete might need to recognize whether or not to secrete the lining of your uterine wall. Gonotropic secretion, again, these have both positive and negative feedback mechanism. The big one that you kind of have to talk about a little bit is going to be that positive feedback will control how much luteinizing hormone is secreted. Okay, and so this is going to be the situation here. It's all going to be based off of here whether or not you have the estrogen and progesterone levels. That will indicate whether or not you need to secrete more of your luteinizing or follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so kind of just the important things about the reproductive cycles. When we talk about the ovarian cycle, obviously the most important thing is that you have your ovia at regular intervals, which allows for the ability to produce a fetus. That's obviously what the whole goal of the female reproductive system is. It also regulates the endometrial cycle because it controls how much estrogen and progesterone are being secreted. That kind of the idea here is that ovarian cycle dictates that because it dictates ovulation. The endometrial cycle, that's basically we want to make sure that the uterus is suitable for implementation of a new embryo. Okay, and the fact is that anytime. The idea here is that this cyclic nature allows for us to essentially plan whether or not what the best time is for us to be fertile within a few days of each month. That doesn't mean that fertilization can't occur at any day of the month, but it's most likely to occur during ovulation. Okay, so infertility when it comes to females, this is usually considered, again, when you've been trying to conceive for a year of regular unprotected intercourse, and it can be caused by a variety of things. It could also just be that, just how you are, you were born that way, because remember, most of the times all of our eggs are developed when we're born. So again, most of the time it's a result from a failure to be able to ovulate. So you may have the eggs available, but you're not able to actually develop them. So a lot of times we'll look at, they'll do fertility drugs. Essentially, they'll give you more hormones to stimulate the ability to ovulate. In addition, you can also look at in vitro fertilization, essentially making the embryo happen by getting harvesting some of your eggs, and then doing it basically having the fertilization happening outside of the body, and then putting that back in to be put into your uterus. Okay, so we talk about this last part here. So this menstrual flow first occurs at puberty, and this is it can vary. So you don't really can. Some people start at like 10, and some people can start at like 8, 17. It all depends on just a variety of reasons. No real way to predict it. You usually experience this for about 3 decades, and by the time you're 45 to 50 years old, you're going to start going through what we call menopause, which is essentially what that is going to be basically the ending of your menstrual flow and your menstrual cycle. So you're no longer, going to be getting period. So the idea here is that your estrogen concentration decreases because that's what causes for you to ovulate. And if you don't ovulate, you're not going to get any eggs to come through your uterus. So there's no reason for you to release that uterine lining. Okay? So again, here's the gonadotropins versus your estrogen. Okay. So let's go ahead and stop here, and then we'll do one more video about your breasts.